Forward Base Sawano at Xeno Island by Tactical Cat. Part 5. Miyomade. Episode 12. Remember. Fleet Admiral Nigel, came a voice out of the sky hours later. It was Commander Erwin. You are under arrest for treason against the Federation and humanity, along with a bunch of other minor crimes like murdering people and espionage and stuff. How long had it been? This is Admiral Now speaking, continued Forward Base Sawano a moment later. Thanks for waiting on me. Sawano Base took a bad hit, and we spent the morning trying to get communications online to request reinforcements. No one was expecting railguns today. Any sailors who were still out on decks cannon loading stopped for a brief moment and directed their attention upward. The Admiral was being way too casual about this. I know the losses we've suffered won't ever seem to justify any victory we could have here, he explained to them. No fleet should have to celebrate a victory over traitors and pretend that the loss of good men was a routine sacrifice for the human race. I'm sure it seems like Fleet Admiral Nigel dragged us into a pointless battle, and that our sacrifices today were wasted on cleaning up after this mess. Was he, too, going to announce a fleet-wide surrender? I want to personally assure each sailor in the fleet that the continued, efficient execution of your regular duties is not a pointless endeavor, and our victory here will shortly be assured. Admiral Nigel ventured out onto the bridge wing, wondering what sort of nonsense had enlightened the young admiral today. They had danced over the board until nothing but kings and rooks remained, and Admiral Now had spent the last hours paralyzed in check. Reclaiming the Eastern Theater is impossible alone, even with the extraordinary powers of the jewels, Admiral Now explained. We've learned this now, so the square will have to adjust accordingly in the future. But for now, as we speak, the Federation's 5th and 3rd fleets are converging on our position. Immediately, Fleet Admiral Nigel scrambled back inside and passed out orders for the fleet to reassemble into a more defensive posture, destroyers in front, and every air wing at his disposal deploying. Don't surrender yet, concluded Admiral Now. This is all. Immediately, his sailors scattered about the decks of the Jewels threw themselves into their work with renewed vigor. Within moments, a barrage of artillery centered on Fleet Admiral Nigel's fleet. Admiral Now had relayed orders to the two halves of Xeno Island. Along with its spread of smaller, one-man fighters, Sawano Base, the first half, began to output a barrage of laser fire. Air squadrons from Nigel's carrier swept down upon the surface, putting their explosive burdens to bed. Sawano Base, the second half, released wings of flak in response, capturing the sky in outspread waves of smoke. Finally, the 5th and 3rd fleets arrived, together numbering tens of carriers, 20s of cruisers and destroyers, and the occasional submarine. Standing proudly in the bridge of a rather diminutive, ungainly battleship, Alfonso cackled like a villain as he rammed through not 1, but 4 hulls of Admiral Nigel's ships. The old farts had returned, bringing their legendary damage potential with them. For hours now, Kin had been immobilized in a deadlock before 5 enemy submarines. As far as he knew, he was the only captain of the Jewel still alive. Toby had gone silent some time ago, and no reports had come in since. Only after Admiral Now's message did he have any intel. Surfacing to check conditions would have been too risky. At length, a series of radio signals buzzed into his bridge. Sonar heard the deep-sea drone of a few torpedoes at their right, and then silence. The sub-signatures disappeared. We got you, Captain Kin, reported a sub from the 5th Fleet over his comms. It's a pleasure to finally meet the killer whale. Kin took his eyes off his comm screen and glanced inquisitively into the eyes of his bridge crew, as if to ask a confused, What does he mean? Of course! The captain hasn't heard about it yet. No one would have told him, observed his first officer. They've been calling you the killer whale ever since you took out the smiling dolphin. You're a prodigy, Captain Ken. Embarrassed, he retreated into his wonted silence about the matter, and instead joined the friendly from the Fifth Fleet. Over the next hour, the Fifth and Third Fleets scoured the ocean. They extracted the immobilized Sonato Fern and Toby's ashes from the center of the engagement, in the process wiping out Admiral Nigel's fleet. Only his carrier and its escorts remained at full capacity. The rest of his fleet was scattered across the ocean graveyard, a desolately pure blue punctuated by the skeletons of rotted ships and the plethora of vested sailors floating on the ocean dunes, awaiting retrieval. Admiral Now landed the two halves of Forward Base Sawano off the shore, and called for the unconditioned surrender of Fleet Admiral Nigel's task force. John flipped through clipboarded files with the grin of accomplished satisfaction playing at his lips. It had taken until an hour before lunch for Senior Chief Annie's inspections to declare the upgrades to the jewels complete. With her signed authorization in hand, he found himself skipping the way down to AZ to deliver the final reports to Lieutenant Commander Sten. Passing the purple-tinted bay doors, John picked up the distinct sound of an ear-ringing metallic clunk that dented the air every few seconds behind the rhythm of a sliding cello aria. Words tore from a soprano's soul into a voice that echoed as far as the reaches of the universe. Sten was listening to the tale of two binary stars. It was an ancient legend about the aftermath of war. Good day, Lieutenant Commander? Saluted John through the lab doors, dipping his head into the confluence of the music and Sten's rhythmic experimenting on a container of green goo. I have your reports from the docks today. The jewels are all done. Sten closed his thermotorch that had been sparking plasma inside the goo, and turned his head to face the entrance, lifted his face shield with a glove-insulated hand, and saluted back. Electrostatically disheveled hair fizzled out from behind the helmet. Glowing eyes blinked out from within side-shielding clear goggles. A mischievous grin meandered across his face, where tributaries of green goo had stained riverbeds into his skin and hair. "Liking the madness look," complimented John, lowering his salute and placing down the clipboard on Sten's usual desk. "It gets better every day." The apprentices at AZ had yet to decide if Sten was just exceptionally invested in his cosplaying, or if he really had embraced the image of the crazy scientist. "No issues to report this time," continued John, very much enjoying the uniqueness of Sten's appearance. "The new gear you sent us is fantastic. Senior Chief Annie is a lot happier doing high-up jobs now, too." Little did they know that the new paint job Sten had begun carrying around was a byproduct of his insistence on understanding how the green goo worked. "Thanks for the report, Seaman," acknowledged Sten at length. "It sounds like our research efforts at AZ are proving valuable. By the end of the week, I should have something made which even this little menace can't eat up." And he dipped a finger into the vat of goo, scooping up a portion that slimed down over his finger to rejoin the larger body below. Sten didn't seem particularly concerned with safety today. "I've already tested it on my clothing," he elaborated, "and it seems to be neutralizing the corrosive effects, so you can expect safer working conditions for all the dock boys soon." Then again, was he ever? John nodded and headed out. Back in the pristine hallways, he made a few lefts and rights on the way back to the dock. At length, he overheard the subdued chatter of more purple shirts. "I see," observed Admiral Ken. "You disappeared to take out Fleet Admiral Nigel's flagship from below, but couldn't metabolize any more of Trolls." "Ah, ah, ah, ah." That's why Captain Toby said you disappeared? Confirmed Ken. John saluted the two admirals as they passed by. No further side effects? Oh, that makes sense. Apparently, Petty Officer Gabby had been following Adam around since the final battle and taking regular blood samples. John would never forget the ruckus at Nature's Kitchen that evening when Captain Adam had finally returned for dinner. John chuckled as their voices faded. Continuing down the hall, he found himself all of a sudden staring into the green that painted the bay doors to the docks. "Where is John?" yelled a familiar voice. He burst open the bay doors and sprinted to his workstation at the left end of the dock. Above his head, Senior Chief Annie was suspended in the air beside the hull of an unnamed gray jewel. An India channel within her belt streamed with channels of green. Her gloves seemed to be sewn from green textiles, too, and her boots and visor were bordered with it. "Reporting back, ma'am," John yelled upwards. "John, glad you're back," she called out. "Adjust the anti-grav levels, would you? I'm heading inside the hull." John ran over to a controls panel and tapped the usual array of fancy buttons that gives an audience the impression of advanced technological knowledge. Annie angled her body as if in flight and followed the path of an invisible magnetic field. AZ had spent weeks since the end of the war researching the strengths of the green goo, and this latest invention was just one of their many breakthroughs. Annie welded musically away within the grey hull of one of the jewels. Zap, 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 zap. After a repetitive hour or two of usual maintenance work, John picked up the footfalls of another purple shirt. Immediately, Doe and Smith ran toward the entrance, like children being offered candy. Admiral Thulner, you're finally back." Everyone adored him. "I'm back," the newly Admiral Thulner replied cheerfully. He had just returned from Save after a final release from Lieutenant Commander Mikasa. Now that it had been a while since he had been able to cut it, it looked like he had borrowed one of Yuki's hair ties. And his arms and face had been patched up extensively with bandages. And Mika must have enjoyed herself. "How's my new ship coming along?" he inquired. "She got a name yet?" John smiled. The evening after Sawano Base had landed, Alfonso had miraculously towed back Captain Thulner and the crew of the XLTT. The XLTT had agreed with her captain to shield a fellow battleship, unwilling to serve Fleet Admiral Nigel's task fleet. But after eating one final torpedo, her time in the service came to a spectacular and heroic end. If they ever recovered her wreckage, she would probably be converted to a museum ship and moored by the continent where she sank, in honor of her crew and the 4 fleets that had fought there that day. They had already conspired to add another plaque to commemorate the victory. "The Fleet Admiral said he wanted you to christen it," yelled Annie, poking her head out of a gap between 2 metal hulls to inform the captain. "Since they decided to let him name it, and it's yours after all." Annie angled her thermotorch back onto the metal. "Whatever you called her," observed Alfonso, "you better treat her better than my poor XLTT." But he chuckled proudly, arms crossed and feet apart. John's team cackled. It had been a long 5 years ago when they had at last felt the ease to laugh so freely. It was refreshing to see the dock team so brightly spirited. Admiral Thulner joined Ensign Era and Commander Irvin up on the Outlook for Lunarian coffee as Senior Chief Annie's team finished the final outfits for the replacement of the XLTT. At length, Doe, Smith, and he were shooed away by the Senior Chief to go and get out of my way and get yourself some lunch. John had become fond of her unique, abrasive kindness. They were still the most productive team at the docks, thanks to her scary leadership. "Yuki-san," John heard, entering the clamor of lunchtime Nature's Kitchen. "Have you read today's issue of Sagittarius News? It really was Sten's cousin." Admiral Toby thrust his comm screen over their dishes toward her, excitedly tapping a silver, metallic leg beneath the table. Lieutenant Commander Mika had made such a natural prosthetic that everyone could hear it clanging down the hall every time Toby turned the corner. Petty Officers Gabby and Choconut had assumed it was just an exemplar of scientific curiosity at work and did their best to ignore it. "The researcher?" Admiral Yuki inquired, peering out from behind a singular eye. A burn scar over the other eye was barely obscured by a black tuft of hair drawn down over her face. "I forgot to ask Sten about that last time." The reporter on video spewed out the usual non-stop news package from the screen. "Update on the spaghettification theory discovered at the start of the year. After investigating Fool's Chasm, a probe seems to have discovered the original scientist who left his mark on the system, still alive and well thanks to his white hole despaghettification technology that he apparently brought with him. His successful and live recovery has rapidly become the talk of the scientific tabloids. We actually have the researcher on call with us today. Stenik, after going through the harrowing process of spaghettification and making it back out alive to prove that black holes actually go somewhere, do you think your Darwin Award will be revoked?" Over at the food service counter, the gentle drone of a hot blue thermo knife slid through a potato, leaving a starchy yellow-white flour behind. Lieutenant Angela scraped the knife and wiped it to an enthusiastic applause. She had delivered another perfect carving today. Anyone inclined to eat the head off a mole-like potato or chew the leg off a frog-shaped broccoli was welcome to her row of creations that had been developing at the salad bar, if they could get past the weirdness. She turned off her knife and scanned the room with a sigh. It was about to burst into chaos here. Nishi and I needed to get back soon before she had to feed lunch to a whole fleet. Suddenly, she dropped the knife onto the counter. A tall figure swept through the entrance, draped in pink and white cascades of fabric. Yuki looked up immediately from Toby's screen. "It's that noble again!" Angela ducked onto her stool beneath the counter, and Toby downed most of his Lunarian coffee in a gulp. So, no one was brave enough to tell her, he thought. Not even the Admiral. I will accept the sacrifice. I will take the hit for the others. Thulner, and Adam, and Ken, this is for you. Yuki-san, he ventured, as if assigned the desolate role of newsbearer and told to report a soldier's death. That's Lieutenant Commander Biek. Yuki stared at him and then back at the commander. From the side of her eye, she noticed Lieutenant Angela behind the counter, decommissioned by a paroxysm of laughter. Face tinged with red, she seized her cup of iced yogurt in both hands and drew it toward her on the table. Oh, and she sank down in her seat, hiding behind the cup and the eye-obscuring hair. No wonder I couldn't find him. The moment was embarrassed into silence, until at length Lieutenant Angela switched on the television. Fleet Admiral Now's voice rang out across the mess hall. On December 6th, year 2701, opened now. The Federation won a decisive victory in the Eastern Hemisphere, driving back the invasive alien force and reclaiming the oceans for humanity. That same day, Fleet Admiral Nigel took his own life. He delved into an encomium for the excellence of the thousands of personnel who had taken part in reclaiming the world. Nature's kitchen hushed. "Admiral," asked a reporter as his speech concluded and the applause subsided. "As of this month, you're the fastest rising officer in the ranks today, with a double field promotion after the death of Admiral R2S, and now hitting Fleet Admiral after the betrayal of Fleet Admiral Nigel. How do you feel about replacing the Fleet Admiral who was once your former mentor?" Now only stood straight and squared before the camera, preparing careful words and gesturing confidently with his hands. He was ashore until the evening, appeasing the sob fraternity at a mandatory press briefing. All of the boys at Sawano Base sympathized with the Fleet Admiral's position. Military life on the war front was nothing like the safe security of civilization in the opposite hemisphere. On the other hand, they also understood that the Federation and their countrymen needed answers. "I'm not the only one who has lost mentors," Admiral Now explained. "Our Lunarian friends have suffered a great deal, too." He was alluding to the loss of Adam's mentor, Admiral R2S. "And Fleet Admiral Nigel would have been executed either way," ventured Now, "likely in court-martial under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It had to happen eventually if we didn't take him out ourselves. After all, this is not the first time we've seen this sort of thing happen in history. Just take a look at Hitler and the Japanese during World War II. Happened all the time. I'm honestly not surprised by his decision." But Now sighed. "I just wish I could have asked him why he did it. It caused a great deal of unnecessary death and loss, not just for our fleet, but for our fellow citizens back home. I understand why he would choose to commit suicide. He's just leaving a lot of things unsaid." The reporter was respectfully silent. "Ultimately, we have to leave the judgment of Fleet Admiral Nigel's motives to the next generation's historians. All I can say is that we won. At a huge price, our boys finally won, and that's all that matters." "I will drink to that, Admiral," announced Toby, chugging the last of his Lunarian coffee. "I will drink to that," repeated Yuki solemnly. As Fleet Admiral Now concluded his press briefing, a strange atmosphere of pained respect inundated Nature's Kitchen. For a brief moment, Forward Base Sawano seemed to salute its old, beloved Fleet Admiral, who had fathered the greatest fleet in history. And then the buzz of lunchtime ventured forth like a curious child, reaching out to the world, full of hope for tomorrow. The news channel moved on from war talk as Nature's Kitchen came back to life. "Trending in the scientific sector," a different journalist announced, "biologists have finally found vengeance for Earth's flightless birds." A low-quality, shaky video of a young Lunarian penguin taken from a handheld comm screen appeared on the television. Trending in the scientific news feeds is this recent video released by a military medical attachment from the war front. Apparently, this top medical division has discovered that our friends the Lunarians are actually capable of flight. Toby spit out the last drops of his coffee.